Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We're just giving it a couple minutes to allow our virtual community to get settled into this space. Welcome to each of you. Happy Memorial Day weekend. I know that many folks are probably traveling today and will be catching this as a replay. But nonetheless, we are always grateful for anyone that takes time to engage with our Intentional Conversations VodCast community. I want to welcome those who are joining via LinkedIn Live. I want you to be aware that if you want to optimize your experience as being a participant, a part of our podcast, then we do encourage you to consider going to the link that's going to be placed into the comments for you and joining us in the virtual Zoom space. But if you prefer to stay there, then certainly we're watching the chat and we're bringing a lot of whatever type of commentary you may have into this community. And we're glad that you're here nonetheless. Cameras today are encouraged, but never required. We know that people are participating in whatever capacity that feels appropriate for them, but we do love to see smiling faces. And so if you are inclined to turn those cameras on today, we'd certainly love to engage with you that way. I also want you to know that at NWC, we really do believe in practicing disability inclusion. So we do have closed caption that's available for those who may need it today. And speaking of NWC, I want to shout out my team. Best, hardest working team that I value tremendously. They are always working tremendously hard to make sure that this virtual community has an experience that is impressionable and one that you can return to week after week. And so we're so grateful for all of those who play a part in this virtual space. I also want to let you know, please go to the chat. Let us know where you're joining the conversation from. It's always great for us to be able to see where people are representing the different geographies across the country and beyond. We do have some folks even international that are friends of our podcast, and we are so grateful. So let us know into the chat. And while you're sharing where you're joining the conversation from, if you feel inclined to also invite this community to be in community with you, then I ask that you please share your LinkedIn information. Doing so lets us know that you're willing to be connected. And my team will share my LinkedIn as well into the chat, and definitely would love to be connected to each of you in whatever way possible. So we have been expecting you. This is Intentional Conversations VodCast, where we intersect conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership and business. And so welcome again. So yes, as the screen said, let the conversations begin. I am Dr. Nika White, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I serve as the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC, and I am so grateful to serve as the host of Intentional Conversations, and I cannot wait for you to meet our guest co-host today. I know it's going to be really rich conversation. And so I just want to invite you to just sit back, relax. One of the things that we normally like to do here at NWC and our Intentional Conversations podcast is just to acknowledge some of the national observances that we feel are really important, especially as it has a connection to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so we are still in May. While May is going to be ending soon, it is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I've been seeing a lot of comments and conversations happening on social media, rightfully so. But I just want to encourage us to keep the conversations going around mental health so that we can break the stigma. It's so critically important. I also want you to know that we are recognizing Better Hearing and Speech Month. And so ASHA is what that stands for. Again, want you all to take some time to research all of that, what that means, and just make sure that you are finding ways to support communities that are in need. And we're grateful that we can bring this to your attention today. It is also AAPI Heritage Month. And so make sure that, again, you're finding ways throughout the whole year, but definitely as we are closing out May, continue to make sure that you're finding ways to be an ally and to support all of the needs of our AAPI friends, because they are so deserving. We see you, we hear you, you're valued, and we want to make sure that we continue to amplify that message. And as we approach the end of May and we go into June, want to remind you that Juneteenth is actually recognized and celebrated in the month of June, of course. And so at NWC, we have some specially curated programming and meaningful experiences that we would love to be engaged with your organization around. So if you haven't yet, it's kind of the last minute, but if you haven't yet planned your Juneteenth event or programming or experience, then reach out to us. Let us know. We'd love to be able to support you as best as we can. Now, if you all have been a part of this community, you know that book number 3 released at the end of January. I'm now almost 4 months. My book baby is almost 4 months, and it's called Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI, available in Kindle, hard copy, audiobook, anywhere where you like to purchase your books. Amazon, of course, is a very convenient way to get it. And that is in partnership with my publisher, Forbes Books. And so I'm so grateful. I'm going to ask my team to please place into the chat a link to the Amazon page where you can, if you've already purchased the book, write your review for me. Those reviews are important. I do appreciate it. And or maybe purchase the book if you haven't already and gift it to someone if you have your copy. As part of Inclusion Uncomplicated, we also launched some learning experiences that are all around unraveling the knot that binds humanity together. And so I want you to consider how can you bring one of these learning experiences to your organization. So my team will place the Unravel the Knot link into the chat so that you can learn more about what that experience entails and all the different ways in which your organization can potentially consider being a part of the Unravel the Knot experience. Now, one of the things that we like to do before we bring on our guest co-host for the day is to give you information about what you have to look forward to in future weeks concerning our upcoming guest co-host. And so I'm really excited because the June lineup is amazing. So Friday, June 2nd, we are welcoming Dr. Katrina Hutchins. And Katrina is a dear friend, and we're going to be discussing the power of women's voices, stories, and positioning and freedom. If you don't know Dr. Katrina, she calls herself Dr. K. I hope that you will get to know her and that you will join us on June 2nd. And following June 2nd, the next Friday, we're going to be welcoming Dr. Vanessa Marie Perry. Again, another powerhouse that's in this space. And we're going to be discussing empowering Black women leaders, creating those safe spaces for Black and Brown women, and what's also important for the next generation of DEI practitioners, a really important conversation. So if you're in that space, if you're championing the work of DEI, if you are a woman of color and you really want to understand how to catapult yourself to the next level, or if you are an ally of women of color and you want to be able to know how to support, then join us on Friday, June 9th. Now, we are booked through September of this year, but we are looking for guest co-hosts for Q4. And so if you know of someone that you think would add great value to our VodCast, we invite you to share that information with us. You can send it to my colleague, Amora Carter, at amora@nikawhite.com. Many of our guests that we've had this year have come by way of recommendations from you, and we are grateful for that. Now, last but certainly not least, and really why we're here today in terms of how we're going to spend our time this hour, is I want to give a formal introduction for our guest co-host today. You all know that I do this every week because I want you all to know the accolades, the credentials, the experiences that our guest co-host show up to the conversation with. And then I'm going to invite her to introduce herself and share a little bit more. Tara Robertson is a leadership coach and diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. She is an intersectional feminist who uses data and research to advocate for equality and inclusion. She brings nearly 15 years experience leading change in open source technology, communities, and corporate spaces, including 3 years leading diversity and inclusion at Mozilla. As a consultant, she partners with corporate leaders to drive systemic change. And as a leadership coach, she serves women of color in corporate careers to go from underestimated and overworked to unapologetic and wildly successful. Her work has been included in Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and many other publications. And so, VodCast community, you know what to do. I want you to take to the chat. I want you to find those emojis, those reactions, and help me to welcome our guest co-host today, Tara Robertson. Let her know that we're so grateful and appreciative for her spending time with us on this day. And so I have stopped sharing my screen. And Tara, I'm so grateful that you said yes to our invitation. And I just want to bring you into the conversation so people can hear more about you. And I always start by asking our guest co-hosts to spend just a little bit of time sharing with us a little bit of information about you that we would not know from reading your bio or from looking at your LinkedIn profile. So welcome, Tara. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dr. White. I'm calling in today from Vancouver, Canada, which is the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I see a couple of people here from Vancouver. Thank you for joining. I live here with my wife and our dog, who's named Kinoko, which is Japanese for mushroom because he's a fun guy. And I'm a mixed race, queer woman. My mom's Japanese Canadian and my dad's white of Scottish and Irish ancestry, and identify as a woman of color. And women of color are the center of my universe.
I love that. Mine too. So thank you so much for being here. I love the fact that you shared some of your intersecting identities, because I think that's always important, because just allows for us to have additional insight as people are sharing their experiences and how in which they like to show up. So thank you so very much for that. So Tara, we have a lot that I know we want to talk about that really relates to your path and the work that you do. But one of the things that I know this community really values, and I do as well, is that when big news has entered into the media, for the week, that especially relevant to diversity, equity, and inclusion, it just feels appropriate for us to acknowledge it. Not to say that we have all the answers, we've investigated all the details about it, but
there's a lot going on.
Exactly, but just for some reactions, and there's a lot going on this week. I mean, I think about the Target story, I think about Uber, and so I just want us to spend just a little bit of time, just kind of reflecting, and so in case this community is not familiar, maybe you've been, away this week and you have been paying attention. Then I want us to place the link to, let's start maybe with the Uber conversation. So let's place that link. I'm going to ask my team to place a link to the CNN Uber Chief Diversity Officer story. That way you can familiarize yourself if you aren't aware. But I will summarize this the best as I can. Very succinctly, but the Chief Diversity Officer, the lead for DEI of Uber, was a part of planning and executing this event that was entitled something along the lines of "Don't call me Karen" or "Stop calling me Karen." You'll see the precise labeling of this gathering in the article, and it was very offensive to a lot of the Black and brown people within the organization, and created a lot of outcries and uproar. And Uber decided to place the Chief Diversity Officer on a leave of absence. And so I have my thoughts, Tara, and I have not fully researched the whole story because it seems like it's still developing. But I would love to just talk about maybe some of the curiosities you and I both are holding around this story. So I want to invite you to share your thoughts first.
I have so many questions. Yeah. My first reaction was like, what's going on here? And then I was like, wait a minute, I have so many questions. First, are the Black and brown staff are okay? And it's one thing to, put someone on administrative leave. But if there was harm caused, what kind of care and repair is there? I'm curious about the context and the content of that program. I haven't really been following Uber lately. I don't know what's going on internally, but just thinking about the overall context in tech right now, there's a lot of layoffs happening. There's a lot of retraction on DEI, both people being riffed who work in this area, budgets being shrunk, commitments and accountability sort of being forgotten. And then the other thing that I'm wondering about is the CDO is not new to this. She's a very experienced leader. And I've seen white leaders who are not CDOs make much bigger mistakes and not be sort of put on administrative leave. is this person being held to another standard? What actually happened? And the people who are most impacted, like what kind of care and repair is there for them? I'm
Yeah,
curious what
yeah.
you're curious about.
Well, I'm tracking with you. Some of your curiosities are also my curiosities, and so I'll name those first where there's synergy. So first and foremost, yes, my heart goes out to the Black and Brown colleagues who were very much negatively impacted by this experience. I'm curious about the level of support that's being provided to them right now. My mind immediately always goes to the most marginalized, and so that's where I went to. How are they being supported? And then the second thing that aligns with what you shared is also the point of the curiosities around the leave of absence. Is that normal protocol for all, executives, or is this something that's being done in isolation in this situation? Because I often am really concerned about how the DEI work within an organization is viewed and valued. Is it seen just as significant as maybe some of those other executive roles? And my hope is that there's history and a pattern where Uber could confirm that the way in which this was handled in terms of the steps to require a leave of absence was something that is equitably done across the board. I don't know that, but that's a curiosity for me. Thing that I will say is my understanding of this story is that the individuals who were a part of this panel were also some other women executives at the C-suite level. And so I'm curious about if they were questioned around their judgment, because here's the thing, oftentimes we try to relegate this work just to one singular person, the person who carries the title, chief diversity officer, chief diversity leader, whatever the case may be. But we know this work belongs to everyone, especially those individuals who are also in positions of leadership. And so my question is, what other conversations are happening to the individuals that agreed, that are in leadership roles, that agreed to be on the panel to share also their perspective, and the context that I'm hearing was quite offensive and insensitive to the Black and Brown colleagues. And so, again, I think that there's some parallel between what's coming up for you and what's coming up for me. So we'll have to keep watching it and see how this all plays out. So shall we move to Target now? Target's also under the fire as well. Now, admittedly, this is one that I am less familiar with, but I have been picking up small pieces. And let me just say this before I'll ask that you share your understanding of the Target situation and your thoughts and perspective. I often am asked about who are those brands that you feel like do this work of DEI really, really well. And my response typically is, I don't know if I can really point to like a few singular brands that they do all of the DEI work well. That's just impossible. They may do a lot of things well relevant to DEI, but everything well, there's not like a model organization. I rather like to encourage people to, as they're benchmarking, find what different organizations are doing really well, and then try to modify that to fit your organization where appropriate. But I share that because Target has been one that I will say, I think you need to watch. I think that they are doing a lot of things well, and I could point to many examples. And so I was surprised that this misstep has blown up, and rightfully so. Lots of concerns on both ends. And so, Tara, if you don't mind, can you give us just a quick kind of synopsis of your understanding of the Target situation and then your perspective?
So we've seen Target do this like around Pride stuff, around Black History Month, working with different kind of identity communities to like front and center merchandise or like goods from like Black owned businesses, queer owned businesses, stuff with queer slogans on them. The stuff that they had in there, like there was clothing, there was home decor items, there was like some cute paper plates. There was some really cute stuff. And I think in some of the stores, there was backlash where retail staff felt unsafe and were threatened by the public who don't think that kind of stuff should be in Target. So Target, my understanding, again, not super deep on this one either, but remove the stuff from some of their stores and put it in the back of some of their stores. And that is disappointing. In the CNN article, they talk about like, do we either have it and have our staff be unsafe, or remove it and like have retail staff feel safer. Like, I think first of all, retail staff do a lot for not a lot of money, and to
Mhm.
ask anyone to be unsafe at work is not reasonable. But that dichotomy of either we keep it and our staff are unsafe, or we remove and the community that like, or all or nothing, like it's not that. There's always more than
Yeah,
two options. And I think this is another example where a company needs to do their internal work before they start taking an external stance.
yeah,
And I thought Target has done some really good things, and this does feel like a misstep.
yeah,
And
yeah.
we're in times that are really the politics, laws, and what people are doing and how they feel they can behave in public is really changing. So
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
So I'm one of those, Tara, that I believe in the both and. I believe in holding the middle. I believe that there's a lot of value in paying attention to the nuanced stuff, right? And I would feel remiss if I did not name the complexity of this situation with Target. I say that, and I use the word deliberately complexity because I realize from what has been shared through the CNN articles and other sources that prior to this, the CEO was very vocal about the pride that the organization had and really supporting the LGBTQIA plus community, right? And they felt a sense of leadership around being pretty progressive and how in which they were showing up to support that community. And when I read that part of the reason that they pulled back was because of the safety of their employees, even though the optics of that can send one message, I think that that's where the nuance comes in, and so I am very much reserving judgment until I get some additional intel. But I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that having a sense of pride and support for a community, but then also seeing how those who don't have that pride and that sense of support for that community is creating now harm. It's harm on both ends, agreeable, but creating harm for their employees who they are responsible for while they're on the clock. That's a tough place to be. And so I'm really interested to see again how this is going to unfold and how they will navigate this really delicate situation. Yeah.
I predict so. We're going into Pride season, and
Yeah.
we saw it also with the LA Dodgers. They invited the Sisters of
Yes.
Perpetual Indulgence, who were like a long-standing, super gay, super queer, like amazing group of like human rights activists and philanthropists. They've raised a ton of money for
Yeah.
AIDS. They've done a ton of good work feeding communities. Like they're really amazing. So the Dodgers invited them. There was a right wing backlash. They disinvited them. Then there was a queer backlash, and then they invited them again. So
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a lot of that this year.
Yeah.
And companies really need to center on what their values are.
Yes.
And leaders need to be prepared to take a stand. So it's all good to be like, I'm inclusive when things are good and easy. But it's another thing to take a stand and stand there and have those conversations and really hold your ground when things get complicated and
Things get
messy.
tough.
And
Yeah. Is
that's
this
when
your
we see what
position?
leadership really looks like. Yeah.
Absolutely. Is this your leadership position at all times, or only when you're not met with resistance and confrontation and conflict, right? That is so important to answer. So I love the fact that what you brought to this conversation is the need for leaders and organizations to be really, really, really attuned to what are your values, and that needs to stick. There needs to be some endurance factor, even if once you're met with maybe some other challenges that could feel risky, right? So
And
I
it's like, do you
appreciate.
have our backs only when you're making
Yeah,
money off of us? When
yeah,
we're your like high paying customers, or we're your consistent customers? Like, do you have our backs all of the months of the year? Do you have our backs even when we're not spending money? Like for me,
yeah.
that's what it's about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A really valid point. And I thought it was interesting that at least the CNN article, it kind of led with the amount of money. I think was it 9 million, 9 bill? What was it? It was a really astronomical number. I think it's in the article, but they led with the impact to the revenue, right? And some people are of the persuasion that, well, what about the people that are harmed? How is it that now this storyline is focused, is giving more amplification around the dollars, the revenue that Target has lost? And so again, lots of perspectives and opinions. It'll be interesting to continue to watch on into the future weeks. And so it's yeah.
Ooh, can I just connect two dots? So in
Yes, you
both of those
can.
examples, who are the communities that are most marginalized? What harm was caused, and how do we center them? Like that lens on both of those news articles, like you kind of can't go wrong.
Who's most
And if you're
marginalized and who we're centering? Yes.
one person who carries the weight of this, it's like, well, that actually didn't solve the harm, and that
Yeah.
doesn't help us as a signpost to move through these messy times. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, like I also heard some commentary where folks were saying, I don't know why they didn't prepare for this on the front end by, maybe beefing up some of these security measures, or, I mean, whatever the case may be. And so again, I think that it's clear we don't know what we don't know. Maybe there were some conversations, maybe the individuals that were just totally against what Target was doing and some of the displays, that they had their own agenda. We don't know, but yeah, I'm really interested to see how leadership will prevail from this situation. Um, so Tara, it's Mental Health Month, and lots of conversations around that. Um, how have you this month really engaged in either dialogue, conversations, or other activities to make sure that a healthy mental state was a part of what you are centering for yourself?
gosh, if I'm gonna admit, like this month there hasn't been anything special for me. Um, a coach who I really admire is Sasha Thompson, and every Friday she puts on LinkedIn her Fill Your Cup Fridays. And I think
Yeah,
for
yeah,
those
I
of
love
us
her.
who do this work, it's not about, again, doing a special thing during Mental Health Month. It's about developing a regular practice and in community. Like when I see her be like, how are you filling your cup today? Like it always makes me like kind of step back and be like, how am I? So I
Yeah,
think when we do that in public and do that in community, we start to develop like practices and ways of being that sustain us through this work, because we're not going to be done this year or next year.
of course. Of course. Yeah. So I have been quite vocal of late about mental health, not only because it's the month where I think that it's appropriate for us to even amp up how in which we are socializing to help break the stigma, but it's something that's very live and present for me in my life. And so I asked that question because I'm coming from a place of listening and learning as I continue to kind of navigate and understand all the tools and the strategies. Because yeah, this is not no one is exonerated from reaching a place, in life to where you need to have some access to ways in which you can ensure that your mental health is at a place that helps you to thrive, not survive, but to thrive. And so I think it's critically important. And I wanted to just to make sure I brought that to the conversation. Okay.
Can I also name one other thing here? Like there was a lot going on in the news, and this week was also the 3-year like anniversary
Yes,
of
George
George Floyd's
Floyd.
murder. So if
Yeah.
there's been something weird in the air, and there's been, I think, a collective grief and individual grief, and
Yeah.
so if you're listening and you're feeling a little weird or a little off, like slow down and check in
Normal.
with yourself. Like it's we have the like it's just been layers upon layers upon layers. And if your heart or your spirit needs a break, like there's take that break and take that breath and check in and do what you need to do to be okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so very much for reminding us of the significance of this week, specifically yesterday. It was the 3-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. And I was pleased to see a lot of commentary of people acknowledging his life and sending message of there's still a lot more work to do. I think that a lot of us who are in this space are keenly aware that while you know his life and his murder created this groundswell of support that we saw immediately after, that now is waning. And there's lots of questions around if organizations that made all those commitments are really still committed, because we haven't seen, in some regards, enough change and enough evidence of that commitment. So was that rhetoric? Is it the economy? What is it that is not leaning towards, true evidence of that being realized 3 years later? And so, yes, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing that to the conversation. One of the things that I posted yesterday was just a simple graphic with the words, "Take your knee off my neck." And I posted that because one of the most impressionable things that I experienced after George Floyd's murder was being in conversation with someone. And they literally, said, "I don't want a handout. I want you to take your knee off my neck." And they were referring to, of course, just the racial, inequities that people were experiencing. And I thought to myself, I was really triggered. I remember thinking to myself, how frozen in time I felt, because are we really using language like, "I want you to take your knee off my neck," to describe the pain of oppression that's so real for so many people, and in that moment was fatal for George Floyd. And so anyway, I thank you for giving us just a moment to reflect and remember. George Floyd, never forgotten, never forgotten. Okay, Tara, what's coming up for you right now? I want to jump into these questions. And by the way, we haven't addressed not one question on our kind of our prepared prompting yet.
And that's
okay. Totally okay.
Just that visceral feeling, like, can we just take a breath together?
Yes, absolutely we can. I want to invite all of you to take a breath with us. Yes. Deep breath in, deep breath out slowly. Yeah. Breathing is so magical. It's actually one of the things that I've tried to be more cognizant about, especially as I've been working through strengthening the health of my mental state. And so thank you. Yeah. Deep breath in, deep breath out.
And then what's up for me? Like, I love your book. It's so pragmatic. It's easy to understand. Like, it's so useful. But the parts I'm curious about are this squiggle. Like, and you mentioned unravel the knot. Can you tell me more about this and what this? Well, it's in our virtual backgrounds too. I'm curious. What does it mean?
Yeah. Oh, well, first, thank you. Thank you for supporting by getting my book. That means a lot. So thank you so much. So yeah, it was very intentional. I talk in the book about unraveling the knot. So just imagine that part of the challenge that prevents people from really going all in terms of their engagement and their championing and their, active involvement in helping to move the needle forward around diversity, equity, and inclusion, is that it feels very daunting. They're intimidated by it. It's like, I don't know what to say, when to say, how to say it. So I just kind of stay in my bubble, and I don't want to make any mistakes, and it just feels too complex. And so part of what I wanted to do, I love the fact that you use the word pragmatic, because that was my goal. I wanted to, in a very practical way, help people to feel a sense of agency, and knowing that this is not about having it all figured out, but we do have to engage. And I think part of getting people to that place that have been maybe on the fence or sitting on the sidelines, really watching others do the work, is to help them to uncomplicate it in their minds and their heads. But something is complex, resistance shows up. And I think that is a sign of lack of clarity. And so I wanted to really break down these concepts and help people to find an entry point that they could stay the course with to help solve this work. And so for me, this is like unraveling the knot that binds humanity together. Yes, taking that big ball and just letting it unravel piece by piece, little by little. There you go. I'm loving all this, little by little. And then hopefully as we do that, we're seeing that we are a bit smarter about it, a bit more knowledgeable, a bit more informed, a bit more empathy that's showing forth in our leadership around it. And it allows more people to be in the midst of this work. instead of seeing it as, again, the responsibility of someone else. And so that is the story behind the squigglies. We're unraveling the knot.
Okay,
Yes.
and I also love at the end, you've got these chapter summaries that are like, they're one page visual, like it almost feels like
Yeah.
graphic facilitation kind
Yeah.
of style, graphic
Yeah.
recording. I meant like you're so intentional and deliberate about all the things that you do. Like what, tell me about that design and why.
Um, so okay, I have to just admit this feels a little odd for me because I should be interviewing you and I want people to know all the great things about you, but you're giving me
We're
this space and this
co-hosting.
time, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna lean into it.
I'm
No,
curious.
but you're so kind. I do appreciate that about you, Tara. That's awesome. Yes, one of the things that I was very intentional about, again, and making sure this is seen as a tool, not just a book to be read from cover to cover and then placed on the shelf, not revisited again, but I wanted people to refer to it often. So at the end of each chapter, there are these critical reflection points where I help people through some, micro learning activities to really process what they've read, what they've learned, how they feel about it, how they can apply it, right? And so as part of that, there's also like an infographic, if you will, or a picture graph that highlights all of the most salient points that were presented in that chapter. And interestingly enough, while it's in the book, we also have them as separate files that we have printed, and they were a part of like the VIP packs. So people could they're like flashcards. They can put them on their desk, they can use them. And anyway, but yeah, that is a really unique part of the book that is one of my favorites, and that I'm hearing that a lot of people are gravitating to. So thank you for asking those questions. I appreciate that.
I was so excited. I'm such a fan of yours. I was like, oh, I get to be in conversation with Dr. White. I'm gonna
I
ask.
like it. Oh no, you're so kind. So yeah, my phone just went off and made noise. If you all were wondering, what is that? But I want to talk about you. We've spent almost now 35 minutes just talking about what's in the media, what's happening in my book. I want people to learn more about you and your work and what you do. So tell us a little bit about your coaching and your consulting and the ways in which you specifically like to help guide individuals and organizations around really meaningfully creating the impact that this work requires and deserves. And so talk about that, please.
Okay. As a consultant, I take a data-driven approach, mostly at a strategy and a systems level, working with executive teams to kind of figure out the why, the big picture, so that they can figure out what programs and things they want to hang off of that. I dialed that back a little. I think my heart's tired and a little broken, and I can't have the conversation about the business case for diversity
Oh,
anymore. And
yeah.
so that limits kind of really working with on the consulting side. I am so excited about coaching. I'm working with individuals as a coach one-on-one, mostly women of color, like almost all women of color, to kind of be at choice, to understand their values, what they're here to do in life, what they want to say yes and no to. I
Yeah.
think overwork is a big issue, especially for women of color. And they're operating in these systems that are racist and sexist and homophobic and unfair. So how do they want to be at choice? And
Mm-hmm.
it's so powerful walking beside someone as a coach, asking them
Yeah.
powerful questions and pull out their wisdom. Like there's nothing broken about the people I'm working with, so there's nothing to fix. So it's a
Yeah.
totally different mindset from being a consultant where I'm the subject matter expert. I'm brought in to help fix a problem. As a coach, like
Yeah.
I get to be with people and
I love
help
that.
them like shine a light on things that need to be shining a light
Yeah.
on and be with them and walk with them. And it's such an
Yeah.
honor.
Oh, I love that. I'm hearing a little bit of an empath coming out as you're talking about how much you really enjoy the one-to-one coaching experience. I recall others that are coaching that have been on our podcast before sharing that the difference for them, you refer to it as consulting versus like the one-to-one coaching. The difference for them is that you can more effectively effectuate change in a person when you're doing when it's kind of coaching oriented relationship versus, just broad broadly consulting or training or that sort of thing. And that resonated with me. And I thought I can very well see that, because you're working one-to-one. It's not like you are, having this universal message and then it's going to stick in some way and people are going to apply it, but you're helping walk shoulder to shoulder with those individuals as they're on this journey towards whatever endeavor that they're hoping to accomplish. And so I love that for you. And specifically, I think that you're working with a lot of women of color. Did I hear that correctly? I think I read that as part of your bio.
Yeah, they or women of color are kind of who I primarily want to serve. And I think there's this idea, like coaching is a very white profession. There's an idea that anyone can coach anyone on anything. And
Yeah.
I don't think that's true. There's also this belief in coaching, like who you're being informs what you're doing, and who I am as a queer woman of color and the lived experience I have, like the DNA in my cells. I walk through the world differently than a white person. And I think I can show up differently and more powerfully to serve women of color. But I also
You
want
just
to
said
serve white leaders.
Yeah. So
Go
you
ahead.
just said something that I think is so rich. Who you're being informs what you're doing. I love that. I love that. I'm a big words person, and so I'm always listening for phrases or words that really capture some really important points that need to be amplified. And so I love that. And so oftentimes we're masking. We're not really being who we really want to be or who we really are, which means, okay, are we really doing what we have been purposed and designed to do to the best of our ability? No, probably not. I would say absolutely not. So relevant to coaching, I remember one of the things that you posted recently, and I think we may have it. So I'm going to ask the team to actually share it into the chat. And I loved it. I reshared it, and so many others were just kind of commenting on it as well. And it was how in which you often advise and coach those who you work with one-on-one to have a personal board of advisors, just like companies have board of directors. And you even had a tool that you leverage to help people identify how to go about that. So we're going to place it into the chat, but I want you to talk and share with this community how impactful you have seen that tool to be and why that's even important. Because I would imagine a lot of people don't even think about having a personal board of advisors. And they're probably thinking, well, where do I go? Who is appropriate to even ask? So share a little bit about that.
Laura Hogan is another coach. She did one, she calls it her manager Voltron. And it's also kind of a bingo style card. And I was inspired by her work and thinking about like the conversations I was having with my coaching clients around who they had in their corner, or who they didn't have in their corner, and strategically like who they needed to find. So it's like, who's someone who's going to validate my experience? Who's someone who routinely delegates stretch assignments? Like we know that women of color are over mentored and under sponsored, and sponsorship, those stretch assignments that give you visibility and impact in the business are really important. I'm like, who's someone whose personal brand you admire, or someone who has a high performing, psychologically safe team? Like, so just thought of all of these things based on my experience, based on the research, and based on my coaching clients, and kind of put this together. It's the resource that I needed when I was younger that I didn't have. I think I overly relied on my manager to be all of those things for me. And in most cases, my manager was none of those things. So thinking about where our agency is and where we're at choice, it's like your manager might not be an awesome manager, or might not be an awesome manager for you. And you can still build your board of directors and move your career how you want to go. Like, it's your career.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. And I will say that I'm keenly aware that many of the women that you've coached, they have left excellent reviews on their relationship with you and how you've really been such great support and help. And I think that speaks directly to your leadership, how you like to show up, that empath that I'm sensing that you have. So what values do you align with as a leader?
Ooh, I think values are so important. When we make decisions that are aligned with our values, we feel fulfilled, we feel on purpose, we feel like in flow. And when we make decisions that dishonor our values, we get tired, angry,
Yeah,
start to burn out, or we do burn out. So
absolutely.
I think values are everything. So some of my values are integrity, which for me means walking my talk. Um, one of them, and values don't need to make sense to anyone else. So one of mine is shupachinko, which is what the train conductor says in Japan when the train's ready to go. Like,
Uh-huh.
it's kind of like all aboard. And for me,
Mm-hmm.
that's about taking ideas into action. Like,
Mm,
we can think about things, but if you're not going to do anything about it,
yeah,
did it really happen? Like, outside of
yeah,
academia, probably not really. So both for me and for my clients, it's like when I hear something that's important, or if I know something's important for me, like, what action am I going to take about that?
yeah.
So those are two of mine. What about you?
Sometimes this can be more of a toxic trait, admittedly, but it also has served me well. And so it's about balance. But I will say that I am a person that I don't like to talk about it. I like to be about it. I like to do it. So
Mhm.
once I am like set on something needs to be done, I move fast. I do. I'm like, we gotta go, let's go, let's go, let's go. And sometimes, keeping up with that pace that I may set can be a little intimidating or challenging for others that may not operate with that same level of speed. And so, but yeah, like you, I think
Let's
that
go.
I know I'm like,
Come
this is too
on.
important. We can't waste time. We got to figure this out. We got to do it now. And so it is a balance. It's a delicate balance. But yeah, I've never been asked that question before. So it feels good to just socialize it. They often say that you need to kind of put it out there because then it helps you to be even more mindful of it. And then because others can kind of also help be accountability partners around where you really want to try to not let whatever those characteristics are or behaviors to yield any type of unhealthy situations for others. And so you
Can I
kind of
share a
freed me
quick
a
tip
little bit.
about values?
Yes, please.
So
Absolutely, you can.
you can think of, like, you can discover your own values. You can look at a list. Like, there's lots of different ways to get there. One of them is to think about, like, when do I feel like really on purpose, I'm having a peak experience in my life. But the way I like to think about it is like when something's pissing me off,
Oh,
or
yeah.
when people are
Yeah.
complaining to me, like friends, they get this now. I'm like, what value of yours is being stepped on right now? So those
Yeah.
moments where it's like, oh, this is like not
Oh,
good.
that's
I
so
hate
good,
this.
Tara.
The opportunity there is to discover or name one of your values. So I encourage you in the chat as well, like, curious like what one of your values is, and when
Yeah.
you know it's being stepped on, like, it makes it clear what you need to do next.
That is so good. That is so good. I never thought about it in that way. So you're giving me perspective that I think is helping me to learn a bit more about myself. You're right. I think that if in those moments we have such a visceral reaction towards something, we need to unpack
It's
that. And one of the
important,
ways to do
yes.
so, yeah, is to connect it to a value. Yeah.
So a time
Um,
that this happened for me, someone really lowballed me, and they're like, can you do this talk at our like global tech company that has more than 100,000
that's
people?
happening a
Can
lot.
you
Yeah.
can you do it for
Unfortunately.
$125? And I was just like, are you kidding me?
Mm.
And that's actually one of my values as well. And it's around knowing my worth,
Yeah.
knowing my value, and also honoring other people's worth and value. Like,
Yeah.
so when that happens, I'm like, oh. So I have a series on LinkedIn where it's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, where I tell these stories mostly about me getting lowballed or people making audacious
Happens all the
requests
time. I know. It's a
for
problem.
free.
It's a huge problem. Yeah. Yeah, for free. Yeah, no picking of the brains. No, no, can you speak for free? Yeah, no, that
No,
doesn't work. Yeah.
it
So I am
dishonors my
realizing,
values.
yeah, know your worth. And I think knowing your worth helps us to really be steadfast in our and firm in our position around when to say no. And something else that I'm learning is I don't think it's just enough now to say no. I think we need to say no and then educate why, because hopefully doing so helps to minimize the propensity for those asks to be even presented to others, because yeah, it needs to be a full stop no. Okay, so we have like 10 minutes left, and I can't believe that because we have not even scratched the surface of the questions, but that's okay because I feel
That's
like this has been
fine.
so rich, it's been fluid, and that's how I love it. But we do have a member of our community that has a question. And so, Tracy, I'm going to spotlight you and invite you to unmute yourself and to share. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, and I'm enjoying the conversation. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I was in an awesome webinar yesterday, and the person said we need to be very careful in using words that don't create automatic resistance or trigger for people in this work. So, like, don't be so wedded to terms like diversity, inclusion, but you can use leadership terms or concepts that convey the same principles without, creating the backlash. So I'm curious how you feel about that, because I do feel there's a trend to get so far away from the words diversity, inclusion, accessibility, etc., that I'm concerned that they won't have meaning anymore. So
Yeah,
wanted to hear your thoughts about it.
it's a great question. Go for it, Tara.
Yeah, that's something that's really happening, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I was talking to someone who's worked in this space for about 20 years, and she's like, there's kind of these ebbs and flows that happen, and we're definitely kind of getting to we're not at a point where diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, where it's front and center, where it's well resourced, where we're willing to have those conversations. So I think it's a tactic for sure to be like, let's talk about leadership, let's talk about inclusive leadership and high performing teams. Like that's a kind of a sneaky way to do it when there's less of an appetite. But for me, that discomfort is important. Like if we
Yes.
can't even say these words with people having discomfort, it's like, I'm willing to take a pause, let's take a breath, let's check what's going on in our bodies, because when we run over that as well, like we're not in a place to learn, but not really willing to, we can't shift the thing altogether. It's like taking a math class and being like, numbers are scary, so we're not going to talk about numbers. And it's like, but this is a math class. Like,
Yeah, that's a great analogy. We're in a math class, but we can't talk about numbers. Yeah, I am with you. I think that the avoidance of discomfort is a problem, and I feel that when it is broached, that it's a preference to not use certain words. That's kind of found its way into this broad space and work of DEIB, A for accessibility as well. We have to interrogate that, and we have to ask questions like why. Think understanding why opens up a dialogue to where if the person feels safe to really be honest, they probably also will conclude that, well, maybe that's not enough of a reason to warrant us not using the language. Because let's think about this too. When diversity, equity, and inclusion first came on the scene, and originally it was diversity and inclusion, it was because we were trying to address the racial disparities, the racial inequities. And I realize now that diversity, just in this general form, means a lot of different things, but it cannot negate the impetus for where it started. And so sometimes when you dig further and you get people to explain why they don't want to use certain words, it does end up revealing itself that it's because people are uncomfortable with, the race, having conversations around race. And I think that's a challenge because we have to hit that head on. Now, I will say this too. I am one of those practitioners to where I also believe that in this craft, in this space, in this field, we have to be creative. We have to be strategic as we are driving towards the outcomes and the impact that we want to have. And so that's not to say that I have not found myself and that I discourage people from finding other ways to create that entry point for people to engage in the conversation. So for example, there have been some times to where I knew that language was really triggering for people that needed to be influenced to be able to move the ball down the court, right? No pun intended for the playoffs that are happening right now. But, and so part of providing that entry point was maybe using language like, the valuing and of human difference, the valuing of human difference, right? All types of human difference, I know that right now there are a lot of organizations that are very intentionally making the decision to use belonging as how in which they talk about this broad body of work. And because, for some, it feels a little softer. But again, I think we have to interrogate that, because if it's because we're trying to have certain people to feel comfortable and to appease their feelings, then I think that that's misplaced judgment. Because again, if we're doing this work, we should be doing it to center the most marginalized. And it doesn't mean that not others can gain value from it, but we have to be centering the most marginalized. And so, yeah, so great question, Tracy. So thank you for bringing that to today's discussion.
And then if we're talking about diversity of thought, but we can't talk about racism, like,
Right.
it's like, what
Right.
are we not saying? And
Right.
what's not being said? Like,
Yeah.
there's kind
Yeah.
of another layer of conversation that has to
Yeah.
happen to kind of pull back and be like,
Yeah.
why did we spend the last 15 minutes talking about diversity of thought or ideas, and we haven't talked about racism?
Yeah. I think it's
What's
both
going on
and.
here?
It's a both
Yeah.
and. Yeah. When people lead with diversity of thought, and that is where they hang their hat, I tend to call them on it, because I feel like oftentimes, at least from my experience, when organizations have made that very distinct decision that we're going to make this all about diversity of thought and not address the other dimensions of diversity, especially those that directly impact the most marginalized communities, then that is a symptom of a bigger problem and a bigger issue. And it is often wrapped as avoidance, because that's what it is. We're really avoiding the main issue. I believe that part of what our role is as practitioners in this space is to help people to want to get to the crux of the matter, peel back all those layers, identify the root causes of issues that's compromising diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, and solve for it there. And because if we don't, what we're going to end up with is a whole bunch of like surface solutions that are just going to find itself in this vicious cycles. And we're seeing it now, right? We're seeing it now. And that's what I want to try to avoid. So that's why I think that for me, always think about, let's interrogate this. Let's break this down. Let's get to the why behind it. And the why can then inform, okay, what's our path forward plan now? So I don't know, we may have time for another question. So if anyone in the audience has a question or a comment that you would like to quickly share to this community, I want to give you a chance to do that. Again, you can use the raise hand feature or place it into the chat. And let's see, Tracy, I'm seeing your comments. That's when we fall back into performative works. Absolutely. And that's a lot of the criticism that we're hearing right now, especially around post George Floyd, when so many organizations made many commitments. It was really rhetoric. It was really just performative in nature, because a lot of those commitments have not been realized 3 years later, or even like attempted to be realized. And so that's challenging. Okay, so I'm not seeing any hands raised. And so we have about 3 minutes left. And I would love for you, Tara, to give us a bit more information about how people can connect with you. Like who is your clientele? We know women of color. We know that it's women who are really looking to have that one-to-one individualized coaching kind of partnership. But what else would you say that would help people to understand, okay, this relates to me. I definitely need to be reaching out to Tara.
The other group I want to serve are white executive leaders. So much like with the graphic here about unraveling,
Yep.
I think a lot of people in their heads know what to do. Like,
Yeah.
and when people, especially executive leaders, say, I just don't know what to do. And it's like, let's stop and have a breath there. Like,
Yeah.
you do know. Like,
Yeah, you do know.
you know lots of things. Like, you do know.
Yeah.
But like, what's going on in your body that has you scared or afraid, like that you're gonna mess up? So like,
Yeah.
I want to partner with leaders like that who care about DEI, who care about standing for inclusion, but are still scared and on the fence.
Yeah.
So if you're an HR leader or an HRBP and you work with someone like that, connect with me, because I want to serve your leaders to help them move forward and to help kind of unravel that fear in their body and to move to action.
Move to action. That's right. Move to action. So we have shared your website as well as your LinkedIn information. I do encourage each of you to follow Tara. And I want you to close us out by sharing just a little bit of information, because it builds on what you just talked about, your workshop called Dear White Leaders.
It's actually a one-on-one coaching offering. So it's called Dear White Leaders, Stop Shitting Your Pants. And I realize the name is really bold. If you read the website copy, it's not so cussing, but it's about that kind of partnership with executive leaders who impact the whole organization to really connect with their why, to have an external accountability partner who's going to be like a loving hug and a kick in the ass to move forward and move to action. I totally get all of the responsibility and the stress and like the fear. And once you've opened your eyes in the last couple of years, maybe it's like a reawakening, or the first time you've seen this, you can't unsee these inequitable systems and these racist systems. So if you want to move forward, like get in touch. Like those are the people I also want to serve.
I love it. I love it. This has been
And
such a
for
great
full
conversation.
transparency, no one signed up for my offering. So I had a gigantic fail in that. So I'm also trying to figure out, like, how do I communicate this in a way that lands?
Yeah, no, it's so we fell forward, and that's what I like about the lessons behind. Yes, we fell forward, and so we're going to try again, because I love the premise of it, and I do think that there's a ton of people that need to be signing up for it and need to be engaged in those conversations, and so I love it. Thank you so much, Tara, for being here with us today.
Thank you,
yes,
and thanks everyone for
absolutely.
coming.
Yes. Everyone have a great and safe Memorial Day weekend. And we'll see you back here again next Friday for Intentional Conversations VodCast. Thank you all so much. Thanks.